Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much. It's a real... When Jacqui asked me to do this, I had a real fangirl moment at home. I was running around the living room going, I can't believe this, I can't believe it. So I've had to take deep breaths. Can I call you Diane?
Yes, of course.
Absolutely. Thank you. Jacqui outlined some of your firsts, and I've dug deeper. I've read the book.
Oh my goodness.
I made copious notes. And I have to say, I was going, oh, I didn't know that. But I'm not going to give any spoilers because people still have to buy the book as well. Okay, but there's a few little teasers, like you passed the 11 plus. Do you remember that? Harrow County Girls Grammar School. It's one of the and your brother as well he went to the boys as well, didn't he? So that was one of the first. Having your father having decided to move you from Paddington, where you grew up.
I started primary school in Harrow because we lived in Paddington. We had a house which my father bought because back in the day, we're talking about the 50s now, back in the day, a lot of councils just didn't give black people council flat. They just didn't. And they didn't have to make an excuse, or they just, occasionally they'd do something like, you'd have to demonstrate that you were born in the area, something like that. But basically, they didn't give black people council houses. And some people still wouldn't rent to black people. So what happened is, I'm talking now about North Paddington and Notting Hill even, that type of area. So what happened, people would buy a house. But you couldn't just buy a house and sit there with your mortgage. All the rooms were let. First house my father had, every room was let. And we were in one room with a cooker on the landing. That's what it was. And then downstairs, we had an Irish family it was like they were like our sitting tenants. Uncle Jimmy. Yeah. Anyway, the anecdote I'm coming round to is this. They were in Paddington. My father organised us to move out to Harrow. But back in the day, black people didn't live places like Harrow. You know, they lived Brixton, they lived Harleston, they lived Ladbroke Grove, they didn't live in Harrow. And when my father told his friends, and all his friends were black, they were all Jamaican really, when he told them he was going to Harrow, wanting to move to Harrow, they said to him, I've never forgotten this, they said to him, Reggie, because his name was Reginald, they said, Reggie, why are you going to live on bush? Back in the day, Harrow was like, Anyway, so
absolutely no, because as I said, these are some of the first that come up. So you went to the Harrow Girls County School, but what interested me was your determination from a very, very young age. What struck me is a woman of similar. My mother used to call it stubbornness. Other people know determination, and. You decided you wanted to go to Cambridge after a visit there. Very, black girl, as you say, living in the bush, Harrow school and stuff. But what struck me was your such determination. You went back and did an extra year at the sixth form to get the Latin that was needed to go to Cambridge. I mean, that single-mindedness to start with was just amazing. Then you were admitted to Newnham College, Cambridge. And as I said, there's a series of firsts. First, race relations officer for the National Council of Civil Liberties. First black woman to be elected to Parliament in 1987, along with some notable male colleagues, Bernie Grant, the late great Bernie, Paul Botang. So, Keith Faz as well. And is it possible to play it now? We'd just like to hear your acceptance speech.
That the result
there we go.
Tonight is first and foremost a triumph for Hackney North and Stoke Newington Labour Party, who worked incredibly hard and fought a positive campaign. They fought a campaign on the issue, and they fought a campaign designed to unite rather than divide. I have come a long way to stand here before you tonight hope, not just in Hackney, but across the country, ride on our victory tonight. I hope and believe that I can fulfill those hopes. But I also know that nothing can take tonight away from the people of Hackney. This campaign and this result have been a victory for faith, a victory for principle, and a victory for socialism.
That is one of the nicest clips I had researching this, ably supported by my lovely colleague Karamar here, who's going to go through. And then, as I said, a series of first black woman elected, and it wasn't easy. You went through a whole series of other things. And at Cambridge, one of the things that struck me as well, career advice was short. It wasn't such a thing as careers advice. But there was one bit of career advice that you were given which made me laugh out loud because it was complete reversal. I didn't go to Cambridge, but I went to university, and the parents' education in the community, black community, education. Even before Ona King said it, that was always part of the thing. But you had a piece of advice given to you at Cambridge, which was, do not learn to type.
I read history at Cambridge, which was remarkable in a way because state school children didn't go to Cambridge, right? Working class state school children didn't go to Cambridge much more, a black child. And I was in a women's college, Union College, and I was in my final term, and you had to go and get careers advice. And one piece of careers advice I got, which from the lady at the appointments board, it was very grand lady. A lot of these people at Cambridge and Oxford are really quite grand. And so I came in to her office, we sat down, and all she said basically was, whatever you do, don't learn to type. And if you do learn to type, don't tell anybody.
Well, the reason why, we won't spoil it, will we? They can read in the book. So we'll give you little teasers. But it was a very good piece of advice. I was told the opposite way. Learn to type, it'll give you more opportunity to work. And as a journalist, that was one of the things that you had to learn to do, to be able to type. So I smiled at that broadly. I was thinking, that's there. But not only that, there's a lovely picture of you in the book. I mean, the picture here, the slide there is your first day outside Cambridge. And the second picture, ladies and gentlemen, is meeting Lord Pitt, who was one of the first black people in the House of Lords, really. And it was said such a lot, the joy to see that. We're not going chronologically because the book does that, but I just picked out some nice things that feed in to each other.
Can I just say about David Pitt?
Yes, you can, please.
He was the first black man to run for Parliament. He ran for the Hampstead constituency and he lost. And so that's why I was put in the Lords. And why I mention that, because people forget, because you've got black MPs now, everyone thinks, well, what's that about? You know, what's the big deal there? But because David Pitt had run and lost in what was supposed to be a safe Labour seat, there was a feeling right up until 1987 that running a black candidate was a type of gamble. There was, in the Labour Party, they just had this idea that if you ran a black candidate, even for a safe seat, they weren't going to win. And so for all of us, Paul, Bernie, Keith and myself, our local parties, you know, they really had to give it 101% because they thought we might lose. And part of the reason, you know, I seemed a little elated in the first clip was because I'd done something nobody thought could be done. Sorry.
No, well, we're having the conversation of, you know, if I can trigger to have little anecdotes like that would be absolutely fine. It is true that you've, you know, as I said, you've got a long list of first and 40, nearly 40 years on, decade. I was privileged to be at your count on the 4th of July. I upset my husband a bit. It was our anniversary, but I said, no, I'm going to see Diane re-elected. And I went on. So you had to do it. It was a lot riding on that night. And I phoned him up at 4 o'clock in the morning and went, she did it. So that. But this, still, it's a few memories, isn't it? That's still there. Is at your brother's christening, Hugh, isn't it?
That's my brother Hughie. He's about a year younger than me, and that's his christening. And I'm there, sort of standing at the feet, really, of my mum and dad. And if you look at it closely, you'll see I've got a finger like this, wagging my finger.
Exactly.
And my brother always says, you've always wanted to boss people around.
You've stolen my... Have you been reading my notes? No! It's good. Exactly. There's a gorgeous picture then of at primary school as well. But yes, in your stylish trouser suit and your brother saying, did you always want to boss people around? Yeah. Was that true? Is that true?
Well, you know how Jamaicans are.
Azerbaijan, sadly, I do.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
So, but as I mentioned, your education and going to Cambridge, but you also, the careers advice, you ended up going to becoming a trainee civil servant, and you went to the Home Office. So that is why you know the intricacies of how the Home Office works, and that's reflected in your work and your attitude to a lot of things. But it wasn't straightforward. So can you tell us a little bit about your time there at the Home Office? If you're not breaking state secrets.
Well, first of all, as I said, I was at Cambridge. I got one set of careers advice, which is not to learn to type. Because back in the day, you could have any type of degree, but if you could type, you would just get sort of shoved into some semi-typing job, no matter how great your degree was. But the other piece of advice I got, I went to see my hall tutor, and she said, what do you want to do? And I paused, and I said, I want to do good. And she said, oh, you want to be a civil servant then? Anyway, but there was a limited number of jobs that professional women could do back in the day. So anyway, I applied for this, like a graduate trainee scheme. I had to do a written exam. I had to go away for a weekend, and they put us into small groups and they observed us in groups. And then we had to go for the final interview. And I remember it was in a sort of small committee room behind Admiralty Arch, close to Whitehall. And I remember very clearly what I wore. I have to say it was 40 years ago. But I was wearing...
Can I just interject to say there is a theme in the book about your clothes?
Yeah, I know.
Being very stylish.
I know. I always remember, at important moments in my life, I always remember what I wore. So for my Home Office interview, I wore a blue floral frilly smock. I had long rope of plastic beads, and I had my hair, which had been straightened, all in bobbly curls. Right? So I found the committee room, came in with my curls bobbling and so forth, sat down, and there were like 5 people around a circular table, 2 white men on one side, 2 white men on the other, and a woman, the chair. She's a woman called Mary Warnock, who was very much the great and the good. Anyway, so we all sat down, and Mary Warnock said to me, why do you want to be a civil servant? And I said, because I want power. And these white men, they looked like they were going to die. And it was like, who the F is this little black girl in a frilly smock saying she wants power? Anybody less like somebody that wielded power in the 80s? So yeah, but I got Thomas, and as you say, the Home Office left me with a lasting interest in civil liberties and the criminal justice system, because that's what the Home Office does.
Yeah, because you were, again, at first, you were appointed for First Racial Relations Officer for the National Council for Civil Liberties, which is now known as Liberties. Yeah. So you keep breaking all these, going up and up and up. I was thinking, God, how many more firsts can one person do? And in that time, the 90s, just you were elected onto the National Executive Council as well. and you served on the Treasury Select Committee. So, Diane, you know how the workings of government actually work firsthand, don't you?
A bit, yeah.
For good of, you've served on the couple of most powerful committees as well.
Yeah, I've been fortunate in a way is that I've done things. Before I ever became an MP, I was a councillor, I worked in media, I was a career civil servant, and all of those things helped to frame my politics. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, people, they are policy advisors and they become MPs, or they haven't done anything, they've just left university and become MPs. My view is when people come to see me and say, how do I get into politics? What I always say, which is not usual, I suppose, I always say, you know what, I don't believe in going straight from university to politics or going straight from being a policy advisor to politics. You have to believe in something. You have to have done something. Because I think if you don't believe in anything and you go directly into politics, it's not, I don't know, it could be disillusioning. But this is it, you don't have the resilience. Because if you don't believe in anything, where are you going to get the resilience from? You're going to say, I'm off, I don't need all this pressure, which you get.
Your resilience started from the picture, I would say. Being able to stand up for what you wanted and all the knockbacks, the criticism. So you must have a very strong bone of stubbornness, resilience, whatever you want to call it, which has kept you going and kept us all in the work that you do, admire you for what you do on a daily basis. But you also had some really nice moments. You got married, you had a son, 1992, son James. And as things happen, these things don't work out, but that didn't stop your political life. You still strive and strive. And there's one thing that you were one of the first women, again, a first, to go into the House to vote with your, was it 2 weeks old?
A couple of weeks,
couple of weeks strapped to her chest to vote. There were no nurseries or creches at that time. So,
no,
what was the reaction to that day?
Yeah, well, back in the day in Parliament, you didn't have nurseries. You didn't have pregnancy leave. You didn't have maternity leave. You were just supposed to work up until the latest possible date and then go back as soon as possible. So I remember going back my son would have been, a few weeks.
Yeah.
I went back, and in Parliament, in order to vote, you have to kind of walk through a lobby. You walk through the lobby and then somebody ticks you off a list. It's slightly different now in recent years. It's kind of online now. You use a card. But for years and years and years, you walk through a lobby and someone ticks you off the list. So I was there. I had to vote. And so I took my son in my arms through the lobby. And it caused a bit of a shock. And one of the tourists said, not to me, but he said to somebody, it's bad enough David Blunkett's dog comes in. I think it's a nice place. And even one of the whips, and the whips never really been my best friends, even he said, what did they expect Diane to do with the baby? What did they? Anyway, yeah. That's the key, being a mother and an MP.
I think you handled it very well, because you did not. Most women would have said, oh, I'm going to give this up. But I think it gave you an extra bolt of determination to carry on. Then, you've done various jobs. You were the first Shadow Home Secretary as well, as I said.
Yeah.
First black female Home Secretary. And one of your big friends and great allies, Jeremy Corbyn, who I love the anecdote about going out on a date. Listen up, all you guys, if you want to be romantic, this is not the way to do it. Come on, Diane.
I met Jeremy at the Labour Party conference in Blackpool that year. And I went to Labour Party conference in Blackpool, which shows you how long ago it was. I was a youth delegate. And I was with the prospective parliamentary candidate for my constituency, who was a man called Ken Livingstone. Some of you, I think, will have heard of. And so we were just walking along the promenades in Blackpool, and Ken and I are walking in one direction, and Jeremy's walking in another. And Ken said, "Oh, hello, Jeremy." And that's how I met Jeremy, through Ken Livingstone, just like that. Anyway, we started, as it were, going out. That's probably the best turn of phrase. But we never went anywhere. Never went anywhere. And I started to moan and say, why don't we ever go anywhere? Why don't we ever go anywhere? Because the thing about Jeremy, then as now, his life was 99.9% Labour. So by day he was a trade union official, in the night time he was a councillor, in between he was an organiser. And the only thing he did apart from politics was he would spend, 1% of his time growing vegetables in his back garden. That was it. Anyway, I was complaining, I was whinging on and on. And so he said, then one day he said to me, we're going to go out. And I thought, wow. So I got changed and we drove off. And I thought, maybe we're going to a wine bar. Maybe. Anyway, we drove off, because we were living in Haringey, because he was a Haringey councillor. So we drove off, and we got to Highgate Cemetery. And I thought, this is a bit, where's the wine bar here? We got to Highgate Cemetery. She took me out of the cemetery. We walked to the cemetery, and we got to Karl Marx's grave. That was Jeremy's idea of a date. Suffice it to say, the relationship in that way has not lasted. But you still remain good friends. Yeah.
I mean, I have to say the book is entertaining as well as informative. It's some lovely, you get to see another side of you, which I really appreciated sort of doing the research. So it was hard to, I didn't just want to go through it, so I'm jumping all over the place for bits, because I think, it gives you an opportunity to just recall a few things. When you went to the Home Office and the interview, you wanted power, do you feel powerful?
Well, I feel I've got more power than, let's say, my parents' generation had. It's easy in the here and now to feel, to feel sorry for yourself. This is bad, that's bad. Why are they treating me like this? Why has that happened? And on and on. But I've got a friend, a white friend actually, and she always says about these things. She says, if you're working class and you become a member of parliament, it's the job your parents always wanted for you. Clean, indoor work, no heavy lifting. And I think it's important to remind yourself when you're MP, or whether you're just doing a professional job as a person of colour, that you're almost invariably in a much better position than your parents or grandparents were. And you need to remind yourself of that, because otherwise you can let everything get you down too much.
Yeah, exactly. That's another, I'm glad you said that, because that's what I was alluding to, that other day. And, you mentioned friends. You've had some great allies like Harriet Harman. We did, I can never pronounce her surname, Chakrabarti. So there's been, because in any profession you have to build allies. As a journalist, and the young lawyers were saying sometimes we're the only black person in the room, and you can only get so much done as an individual, but you need to build allies. So Harriet Harman was one of your allies, and she did help you with some advice as well, didn't she? What did she say?
Harriet Harman's a member of Parliament. Well, she actually stood down, but she's member of Parliament for Peckham, and I think she was member of Parliament there for nearly 40 years. Anyway, I knew Harriet when we were both young feminists, young radical feminists. Maybe not quite so radical now, but. So we're actually in quite different wings of the Labour Party, to be perfectly candid, but we've always been on good terms. And there have been certain moments when Harriet has been pivotal. For instance, when I ran for the leadership, you had to get, leadership of the Labour Party, I can't remember what it was.
That was another first, by the way. First woman to run for
you had to
leadership of the
get
Labour Party.
you had to get like 10 nominations, and the deadline for nominations was 12:30, and I only had 8, something like that. And Harriet Harman was the acting chair of the party because Ed Miliband had stepped down, and Harriet was the deputy, and Harriet became the acting leader of the party. So she was the leader of the party. She was the acting leader. So she was organising the selection for the new leader. So there was a deadline for getting all the nominations together. I hadn't got all the nominations together, and she had me in her room and said, "You haven't got all the nominations?" And I said, "No." She said, "I'm going to extend the deadline." And of course, the Labour Party officers didn't like that at all, but there was nothing they could do. She was the leader of the party. And she extended it for, I don't know, maybe an hour, and then we got all our nominations together. And I was on the shortlist, and it was the leadership, I was one of the leadership candidates, and it was very interesting, because I didn't think I could win. It was a lot of fun. I went up and down the country giving speeches to the Labour Party members. And I had a line. You know, when you make a lot of speeches, you tend to have the same line. And I would go, because I went all over Scotland, Newcastle, Midlands, all of that. And I'd be the only black person on the platform, because the other candidates were Ed Miliband, David Miliband, Ed Balls, Andy Burnham, and myself. The only black candidate, any woman, in fact, on the platform. And most places I went to, I was the only black person in the room, actually. Certainly once you came outside the M25, you weren't sitting around with black people. So I always saw the same thing. I'd come on the platform with these other 4 guys, and you could see the audience thinking, who is she? What is she doing here? And so I developed a line which was, I can see you all looking at me and thinking, she doesn't look like a Labour leader, but I'm here to tell you that in the 21st century, this is what a Labour leader looks like. And that was my line, meeting after meeting after meeting. And it worked. And in fact, although in the end Ed Miliband won, it was a kind of collegiate thing. So there was a separate section for members. So amongst the members, I was third, which considering I didn't have the money the other guys had, I thought wasn't bad at all. Had it been a longer selection process, who knows what would have happened.
As I keep saying, you know, I was reading it, gosh, you did all that? I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Sorry, we can't hear you at the back.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We can't hear a word.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
oh, you've missed the best bits. Can I do it on catch up? Maybe we can do it on catch up. We'll keep changing around because it comes back to a lot of the things that Diane was the first at doing. So, you know, there's little anecdotes that come out from a prompt and stuff. So, again, you first black woman MP elected. And as I said, you were then elected, re-elected. And every time you stood for election in the past nearly 4 decades, you've had an increased majority. So you must be doing something right. What do you put down you're getting your increased majorities to, apart from being a very, very good MP?
Sorry for the people at the back. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay, good. I've always taken the idea of helping my constituents personally very seriously. You know, if you come to me, you've got a housing problem, you've got an immigration problem, I'll try and help you. And some MPs aren't quite like that. I'm quite shocked to hear of an MP whose name I won't mention to you. But if he gets an immigration case, he just sends it directly to the Home Office. If he gets a housing case, he sends it to the council. He doesn't actually deal with your case for you. And it's not that I'm a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer like some of you guys. But if the Home Office gets a letter from an MP, they're more likely to pay attention. So I've always been very conscious about that. And what can I say? I like my constituents, they like me. What more can I say?
And that's very true. Can you play? This is the 4th of July, the election night. Can we hear it? There you go.
I'd like to thank my workers, my campaigners, who were very...
So we're just going to pause it and try and get the audio fixed.
Thank you. I think it was important. As I said, on the 4th of July, I went along to the count at Hackney Town Hall, and I made a decision to do so because I think it was just myself and a team from the BBC, and I was absolutely appalled, given the fact that, you know, somebody like Diane was standing. This was her fourth, how many general elections?
I think it's 4 or 5.
4 or 5 general elections, and they obviously hadn't done their homework, because this is when she became Mother of the House, the first black woman to ever hold that privilege. And it would have been really nice. That's it, yeah. And when we get the audio and that sorted out, I have actually got a clip of your speech in the House of Commons on when your first speech as Mother of the House as well, and it looked like one of your proudest moments. So I think it's worth sharing that as well. You know, apart from being an MP, you are, well, I think it's because you're an MP, unfortunately, you seem to get subject to the most abuse.
Yes.
And so much of it is so, well, it shouldn't happen. What keeps you going in the face of all that adversity?
I think it was 2017, I think Amnesty.
Got their attention, just wait for it. Okay.
Continue. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, 2017, that 2017 election, Amnesty did a survey of women MPs and abuse, and they discovered that I had more abuse, sexist, but also obviously racist abuse. I had more abuse than all the other women MPs put together. Now, I've not seen similar research done since then, but my understanding is that I still get a disproportionate amount of abuse, partly because it's a combination of the racism and sexism, but partly because I was the first black woman MP, I became a hate figure for the right in politics in a way that women who have come in subsequently have not. I was the only one. I was the only black woman MP for 10 years. So I had 10 years of being a hate figure, and I've never really shaken it off.
And unfortunately, events earlier in this year with the Frank Hester comments, you know, we won't dwell on it because it was deeply unpleasant stuff. But I think that showed how much people thought about you with deep regard, the coming together of people to say that's not right, and to show you some love. You know, my group of friends, my women friends, who normally a lot of them don't take a lot of interest in politics, but it was like, they can't be doing that to, you know, Diane, they can't be doing that. You know, if you see her, tell her. And I'm like, I don't actually see that, you know, because I showed them the video that I filmed on that. So there was a genuine outpouring of love and respect, and I hope that you felt some of that. How did it feel to feel, you know, did you feel supported?
Yes, I did. Some of my colleagues in my local party, they had a rally on Hackney Town Hall steps. They just decided to have it. And on the one hand, it was curious. They had this, it was a big rally actually, it was packed. They had this rally and they invited various activists to it. But of all except one of the black female candidates, black female councillors in Hackney, didn't come. They didn't come. So Hackney Town Hall wasn't hard to get to. We had one woman who's a really nice woman, but none of the other councillors came because, I don't wish to be rude, but you can't get anywhere in the Labour Party if you are too nakedly concerned about a black agenda. And in that sense, it's gone backwards. I don't believe that if myself and Bernie or even Paul were running today, we could necessarily get a constituency.
That's a very sad comment in 2024, isn't it? Because, you know, there's supposed to be a record number of ethnic minority MPs in the House these days.
Well, yeah, I think there's about 19 Labour women MPs. But I just think it's almost like we're going backwards. I was listening to the young people just now talking about the Labour Party, and I was struck by how little things have changed. When I joined the party nearly 40 years ago now, and then I moved to Paddington, which was the North Westminster constituency. Now I had joined, and I wanted to transfer to Westminster North. So I found out the phone number for the secretary of the local party, and I kept ringing her and saying, oh, you know, when does my ward meeting meet? When can I go? And she said, I'll call you back. And I kept ringing and she wouldn't call me back. And I realised that she was not going to call me back. Now, as it happened, I had some friends, a white couple, who lived in the constituency, and they told me where the local party met and when it met and when the next meeting was. Okay, so it used to meet my local party, my local ward. My local ward used to meet on an estate called the Mozart Estate in Paddington, in a kind of sports hall. Anyway, I turned up on the day, I came to sports hall, I opened the door, and they all looked in horror, and this elderly black man came to the door and held out his arms like that to stop me coming in. And what it was, they'd heard this terribly radical black woman had moved into the area and might try and join the Labour Party. And they kind of dodged and dodged and dodged until they couldn't finally elude me anymore. And I did join. And actually, in the end, I became a councillor for the area. But it's striking to me that the same, ambivalence, negativity towards black members that I saw nearly 40 years ago is still real today, and I think that's quite sad.
It is sad. The dial hasn't moved at all, and that's not just in politics, but in journalism. Which you worked as a journalist as well, so that's why I'm thinking I'm talking to a fellow journalist, so you know all the tricks as well. It's very difficult, isn't it? Because journalism controls the narrative as well. So if we're not getting the right narrative or the description of our people, that doesn't help. So you worked at Thames Television in the newsroom. Started off as a researcher. So you know how stories are put together and what makes a story. And unfortunately, not a lot has changed, I can assure you, since your time in what stories get coverage and the type of stories and how they're covered.
One of the first big political rallies was the Day of Action, and it was about the fire. Was it the Deptford?
No, New Cross fire.
Yeah, it's about the New Cross fire. And so we had a Day of Action. It was one of the first big political rallies, which was largely, the people on it were black British people. Because in the past, when you'd had demonstrations or rallies, it was often about colonial issues or issues, which is great, but this was important because it was the first one where it was about an issue which concerned black British people, these poor young people who died in that fire, the failure of the police to do anything or to look into it properly. And I also remember I went on the march. It started in Deptford and we marched. And we marched all the way, I think, was it through Trafalgar Square? I don't know. Anyway, moved all
Fleet Street.
And I remember Fleet Street actually, people threw things down there.
Yeah, they did, and shouted out the windows, very derogatory terms.
Yeah. Anyway, at that time I was still working at Thames, the London Regional Station. So I went into work the next day, and they were talking about the day of action, and they were saying to each other, why didn't we, because they sent a crew there, right? And they were saying to each other, why didn't we get the violence? We didn't get the violence. Where was the violence? And I had to say to them, I was on that march. There was no violence. And what I'm saying is the media can convince themselves that something fits the stereotype, even when, in this case, I had literally been on there. I was another journalist. And I'm saying, no, there was no violence. There was nothing like that. But they would rather believe the stereotype.
You were suspended from the Labour Party. You didn't have the whip, and it was a very, very trying time. And the fact that you managed to get back, to have the whip restored, and run as a Labour candidate in itself, again, I come back to proving your resilience and your determination. Because from what I understood, it was a bit of a standoff and who blinked first. And you certainly didn't blink.
Yeah, it was a standoff. The thing about Keir Starmer, and no doubt that there are admirers of Keir Starmer in the audience, but it seems to me that much of Keir Starmer's project was about clearing the left out of the Labour Party. It started off by getting rid of Jeremy, and gradually, I mean, the selection, they've been absolutely rigid about stopping left-wingers getting selected. And then it was the last year really before the general, and I think they wanted to have a final clear out. And they made an issue of my letter to the Observer. I won't even go into that, but that became a peg for doing something they wanted to do all along, which was to get rid of me. And at one point, they were trying to do a deal. And the deal was that they would restore the whip, restore it in the morning, as it were, and then I would stand down within hours. And I said, I thought about it, right? But I said to them, I'm not doing that. And I made up my mind that if they wanted rid of me, they were going to have to do it. I was going to make it easy for them, right? And I think what took them aback was how strongly people felt about it. They hadn't bargained on that. My brother lives in rural Buckinghamshire, and he's surrounded by white Tories. And they never talked to him about politics at all. But when that thing blew up about me losing the whip, they were coming up to him and saying, why are they treating your sister like this? And these were, so it all got too much for them. And so in the end, they started to say, oh, well, she can run. But I said, I won't believe it until I hear Keir Starmer say it. And he did indeed go on the media and quite grudgingly actually say, oh, well, she can run. But I didn't trust them. They'd come with their deals. And they were also, they had their deal, and people kept murmuring to me about the House of Lords. Well, no disrespect to anyone in the House of Lords, but you go there because it's part of the same building I'm in, and it's full of people you thought had died. I mean, what? It's never really been my thing. I'm not saying I would never go there, but it's just not my thing. You can't offer me a deal which you know is going to the House of Lords. No, not really. So yeah, I wouldn't accept their deal. In my mind, if they're going to get rid of me, they're going to have to get rid of me. And as you say, they blinked first. But what I was going to say was, there was a group of people on the left who were in the Parliamentary Labour Party, and they were very grateful to me that I stood up to Keir Starmer, because they believed that if I hadn't stood up to him, he'd have cleared everybody else out.
So again, another first of standing up and not thing. Your parents are just, because it comes back, it's the Windrush. You've done a lot of work on the Windrush story as well. And your parents, probably like a lot of people, and my parents came here to work as well. Your mum was quite a character in the, I admire the fact that whatever reason your parents' marriage didn't work out. But your mum took herself off and moved to Yorkshire and took up her nursing career again. I think that's where little Diane's got her determination from.
Yeah, possibly, yeah. No, the marriage didn't work out. But it was difficult to sustain a black Caribbean being married in those days, there was a lot of stress, a lot of pressure on couples. And you know, a lot of couples did survive it, but it is a lot of pressure. And I think with my father, because you're talking about the 50s and 60s, and as a black man, and he worked in a factory, as a black man, you have to absorb a lot of racism, because that's just the way it is. You can't go to a community relations council and complain. You know, you just have to kind of suck it up. And I think what he did, which not every black man did, he brought home his anger and he kind of, you know, meted it out on his family. And it made life difficult for my mother. Anyway, my mother went all the way to Huddersfield, which I think she went to Huddersfield because apparently there was a kind of Caribbean community there. That's kind of as far as she could get, you know. And she was a nurse there. But she was there, I don't know if she's in the clip, but she was there when I first got elected in 87. And she was also there to hear my maiden speech in 87. So that was, yeah.
Because we're running short of time, and there's one little thing I'd like. Can we do the music? Because you mentioned your mother, and there was a particular song that your mum, and this is a quote actually, I think is, yeah.
Well, a couple of things about that. One is the ribbons, I have to say. When I was at primary school, you know, I had regular black hair. But you know, because as I got older, I straightened it and put weaves in it, all sorts of shit, really. But, no disrespect to anyone who's got a weave in. But when I was at primary school, every morning, my mother would comb out my hair and plait it and put ribbons in it every morning. And people sometimes ask me, how did I, you know, were my parents active in politics? No, they weren't. But every morning at 8 o'clock, I heard the 8 o'clock news. And that was on, and some of you may remember that was on the home service. It was the home service, Radio 4. And I listened to the 8 o'clock news. And I was a primary school child, and I would listen to it, 8, 9, 10. And it would talk about what the Prime Minister was doing, what the Secretary General of the UN was doing. And I think to myself, if I was Prime Minister, I'd do this. If I was Secretary General of the UN, I'd do the other. Now, where on earth I got that from, who knows, right? But that's what I was like from a very young age.
Thank you. I think we can all, I can relate to having the ribbons in the hair. Hence, go to bit now, there's a few of us of a certain genre can remember those. Diane, what can I say? But thank you very much. I hope that it's a fair representation, even though it was very condensed, of what you're not just an MP, but you are an amazing woman who's done amazing things. So, ladies and gentlemen.